start just kind of from the fundamental of my faith to begin with. I'm not in charge. I'm God's vehicle for
Mm.
service here on earth. And God, what would you have me do in this situation? So those of us from that kind of faith perspective, we start initially as the number two, or maybe even number three, because God's often saying, I want you to go take care of this person, serve that individual.
You ain't gotta finish first to get your first place prize. Don't need the front row just to let your light shine. The highest place of honor, serving at the lowest point. The power's in the voice, and you ain't gotta make no noise. They might say you finished last, but you still got the power, power, power. It's your time. Your gifts will last. Serve second, you'll still lead. It's yours.
So, Kirk, welcome to the Serving Second podcast. We had opportunity to connect and talk a little bit before we got on, but I just want to share, I just kind of give us an opportunity to share a little bit more about who is Kirk behind the scenes? How did you get to the place where you're working at ESPN, your career coach, all these other things? Just give us a little glimpse of how you got to where you are now.
Grew up in Texas many, many years ago to Saint, and was an athlete. And one of the things that really intrigued me about playing sports was, of course, the competitive angle of it, but probably more so than that, the statistical component that went with that. What people would average, what the trends and tendencies were going to be based on past performance. So I'm going to hold that thought for just a second. Went to college, roomed with a person who was a broadcast communications major. Down the hall was a person who was a calculating IT person. And further down the hall, another guy's an aspiring sports writer. I was in a fraternity in college. I served as rush chairman and got a business degree. And that kind of paved the trail for, yeah, I like communicating with people. I like recruiting people. I had the opportunity to go into human resources. And so that career launched very early, and I did it for 35 years. Late in that career, I came to a crossroads. I want to try something else. I don't know what that's going to be. I hired a coach. And it was about the third meeting with that coach. I'd contemplated several different things. I thought about teaching. I thought about becoming a therapist. I thought about faith-based ministry. But I looked at him and I said, I want to do what you do.
Mm.
And so I went back, got some education, and retired, left what I'd been doing in HR, hung out the shingle to go into coaching. Now, going back to being an athlete and the analytical part of things.
Well, Kirk, real quick, before you get to the athlete side, I want to, because it's crazy you say that, because just a couple of episodes ago, I talked with another guest, and they were saying the importance of getting a coach. And you're saying, hey, listen, I'm in this, ending my career with HR. What was that thing that you really said, hey, listen, I want to go, you got a coach, but what was the catalyst for you going to identify a coach for your journey?
Well, again, I've been doing that for a long, long time. An average person's going to change careers about 4 or 5 times. So, as was the case in much of my life, I was below average. So, I want to get up to average at least. So, what's that going to be? What is going to be my self-actualization career? HR was pretty good. It was a B plus A minus career. But what is going to take advantage of my full gifts and talents? And so that's what I went to explore with a coach. I had some notions on some things, but I wasn't sure. Coaching hadn't really entered into that. But through our dialogue and through my searching and considering what we had said, that seemed to be there like a big headlight, and I was the deer. So I pursued that. That was 13 years ago, and I've been a coach now for 10 years.
Wow, I love it. So now you're a coach now. How did ESPN get in there?
Well, I mentioned my roommates in college and the people that lived at the frat house. The roommate broadcast communications major. He got the break of a lifetime. He was the very first play-by-play announcer when the Dallas Mavericks got their franchise in 1981. So he's there with Mark Aguirre, Ro Blackman, and the whole
Yes, sir.
crew, Dick Motta, in the early days. Pardon me, after he'd been doing that a few years, he had the opportunity to go down I-35, and he took the job with the Spurs. We were living outside of San Antonio at the time, and he was also doing a gig with Southwest Conference football when that conference still existed. He needed a statistical person, and so in 1989, I started doing that for him, broadcasting games on a network called Raycom, which is still around. Southwest Conference had a death in 1995, 1996. We were without an assignment, but this new network birthed called ESPN2.
Mm.
And he was the first broadcast team, the A team for that new network when that came on board. And we did that through ESPN2, through ESPN Radio. He eventually went back to Texas and became play-by-play announcer for the Texas Rangers. I stayed with ESPN, and so I've been through a series of broadcasters in the 35 years that I've been affiliated with that organization. Worked with a lot of outstanding people. The Disney Corporation has been an outstanding place for me to work. And 37 years later, I still love it to Saint.
It's crazy because, I actually grew up in Houston, Texas. And so, the Spurs and, the Dallas Mavericks, we didn't like them, but I understand. I do the 35 connection, I-35 connection. But I love the fact that you were able to get in there and understanding, just the relationships, being able to connect with a friend, and they actually, were able to put you on to give you another opportunity. What was that you kind of talked about? In your role, you weren't the person that was on screen. You weren't the on-air talent. And so you were behind the scenes. What are some of the lessons you've learned or continue learning being in that background kind of facing role in being able to connect as an individual that serves second?
It's about the game, first of all. And so, what can we do to convey and communicate to those that are viewing, those that may be listening, if it's a radio broadcast, the descriptions and accounts of what is taking place? The broadcaster and the color analyst, and if there's a sideline reporter, that's their primary job. And TV and radio vary in that regard. Radio is more verbose because you're having to describe what's not seen. Television, let the action command the attention and then fill in. So making that differential. The second thing, I'm a silent partner. If you hear my voice, there's something that has gone severely wrong. So I lay in the background, I listen intently to what the broadcasters are talking about, the scene set, what's taking place on the court, on the field, wherever the jurisdiction may be, and what can I add that's going to enhance this broadcast? A timely statistic. As I've gotten older and I'm a part of history now, I remember things that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago sometimes. I'll pull that out and hand over something that can enhance that broadcast. So it's a secondary role for sure. I relish it. I have access, which is so much fun because not only do we hear the current stories, but we hear the stories that you're not going to read about. And it's like, oh my gosh, I would have no idea that this would take place. So
You
that's
know,
a little bit of the story of how I got into it. Now, the guy across the hall, he is also in statistics. He has been the Dallas Cowboys statistician for radio for 40 years now. He made a connection with Brad Sham through our friend, and so he continues to do that. The other guy down the hall, who was the journalist, he was the Dallas Cowboys beat writer for the Dallas Morning News for 30 years. He's just retired.
I love you said that. I love that you said, kind of you have a history, and you mentioned your age, and some of our listeners are a little, have been been around for a while. But I love the fact that you made it a positive. You have seen certain things. You've been able to see the industry change and shift, and you're able to bring value. And I think I really want to lean into that for some of our listeners that are hearing this. Listen, just because you're older, you've been around for a while, that's not something to be discounted. But I love that you're leaning in and saying, this is something I can bring to the table that some of these young guns don't necessarily have seen just yet. And I love that perspective.
We went to a concert a few years back. Paul McCartney, he was 74 at the time. He's like 83 now. He's still doing new stuff. He's collaborating with modern artists. That's what he does. John Glenn went into space at the age of 77. I think of people may not be familiar with total quality management, which kind of went into lean and Six Sigma later on. There was a guy, Ed Deming, who was the father of that. He went over to Japan post World War II and educated the Japanese about quality control using statistical analysis. We didn't recognize him in this country till he was 70.
Mm. Yeah, and I love that perspective, being able to identify, listen, age does not devalue experience. In fact, it enhances that and all the things that you've got to identify. Let me ask you this question. You know, a lot of individuals who serve in the second chair or the second seat role struggle with the tension. How do I lead without overstepping? Like, how do I navigate that challenge and that tension? Was that something innate for you in your HR years or your time at ESPN, or was that something you've kind of learned to navigate that dance?
Well, that's a learning experience. I think of the disciple Peter, who would shoot his mouth off at times when Jesus was commanding attention, and more often than not, it was inappropriate. We all can associate with Peter in that regard. I was brash. I knew everything back then. And I think about, how do you still have impact? I had impact in those roles, but not in the right way. I had to learn, I had to have mentors and bosses pull me aside and say, son, this is how we do that, and not let my ego get bruised. And I always remember this one adage that was passed on: you're going to make mistakes. Don't make the same mistake a second time. Learn from it. So that's part of the shaping. I have always been an observer of people, too, Saint, and I would look at how people would do a certain thing, act in a certain manner, and I would incorporate that into my own recipe. So I'm a compilation of everything I've experienced, people I've worked with, people I've supervised, and what can I steal from them to incorporate into who I am as an individual.
I love that. So it's an amalgamation of all the experiences you've learned and being intentional about learning those lessons. You don't have to repeat them like Peter had to do several times.
That's right.
I love this. And I want to shift gears and put your coaching hat on. You help people uncover possibilities and act on them. What do you usually see in people that they don't often see in themselves?
Potential. I see in many of my clients, particularly the younger ones, myself at an earlier time. And it's easy to go into that and say, oh, you don't know anything. But I go into each encounter as a learning opportunity for myself. How can I be curious? What can I learn from this person, regardless of how old they are, what their background is, and incorporate that into this idea of potential? And so I consider a coaching encounter, it's kind of like a couple of people, the one-on-one coaching encounter, where we're on a hike and we're going to take a trail and we're going to see things, we're going to observe some things along the way, and there's something that may arouse us. Let's go check this out and see what's there. And to the client, is this something that intrigues you? Why does it intrigue you? Would you like to look more into that? What do you need to do in order to investigate that? And pretty soon, if coaching is effective, which in most instances for me it has been, they get to thinking on their own about, I've never thought of that before, but I've got the talent, I've got the gift to pursue that. And then as a coach, I've become an accountability partner. Well, to consider this, client, what are the next steps that you need to take? What are you going to do? Who are you going to talk to? When are you going to take these steps by? And so we've expanded what the landscape, what the network is, what the capability is for that individual. And those are those aha moments that are so rewarding for me.
I love that. And I really I enjoy the hearing just those finally getting somebody to for them to see, wait a second, there was more in me than I thought. And I love having that additional perspective in that coaching realm. Do you have you been able to learn a little bit more about yourself in helping others? Like being able to, what are some things you're coaching, but what is it things that's been impactful for you?
Well, I think we're all seeking wisdom and we want to be a wise person. We want to have knowledge. We want to help people. And so that's always kind of been a quest of mine. How can I find wisdom? And my parents would tell me years and years ago, the older you get, the more you're going to realize what you don't know. And that has become so true. So I want to learn. I've got a quest for learning. I learn that through the people that I work with, through the curiosity I have, to the different stories that they present. And I'm just kind of sometimes when they mention something, you did that. Tell me more about that. And so their confidence is boosted, they're encouraged. Hey, I've got an audience, somebody who is truly, genuinely interested in me. And again, that's so fulfilling to see that take place.
Now you, I looked on your website and and if I'm wrong, please correct me. The Seed Sower, you know, how did you come up with that name? And tell us a little bit more about that.
I've been a gardener for a long, long time, and I've always had fascination with putting things in the ground and watching them sprout out. We're in Northwest Florida right now. It's springtime. The green beans have broken ground. The tomatoes are out. Uh, I was wandering around in the garden just before we went live here, and that's just always fascinating to me to see that take place. The Gospel of Luke and the parable of the seed sower is what we aim to do as coaches, in my mind, is we plant those seeds, we nourish them, we tend to them, and they produce great fruit. And so, from the combination of those two concepts metaphorically, that's how it very easily became the Seed Sower Coach.
I love that idea and I love the story, you know, just the idea of having it fall on fertile ground, the seed falling on fertile ground. And what I'm hearing you say about potential, for many of us, we feel like we're that rocky soil, but in reality, you know, with a little tilling, you know, we actually have a lot more potential inside of us when we recognize, hey, something can grow here. And I love your ability to be able to pull that out and allow people to see there are green beans or onions or you know, whatever those things are inside of us to where we can grow and develop and use our gifts.
And if we take our time and we're passionate enough about it, we can pull those rocks out of the soil. We can add different kind of amendments. If we need to lower the pH or raise the pH of a soil, those are things that can be done. It may require a little bit more work, but that's in a client. They may not be gifted or talented in a certain area, but they can adapt. They can learn ways to make a presentation if I'm scared to death of talking to people, or become a responsible budgetary manager if they have no gift with the dollars and cents. It's going to require more time. They can get there, or they can figure out how I can get people to assist me, and people love to help.
So what I'm hearing is for that individual that's listening now, number one, you have more potential than you actually realize. And then that area becoming or remaining a lifelong learner to continue to grow. And I love that you said after 35 years, you still recognize, hey, I need a coach to help me grow. And now in this second career, you become the Seed Sower Coach. I love that.
To Saint, I wrote a book,
Good idea.
and the book is out. Book is out on Amazon. I've got a column in the local paper here talking about leadership, communications, some sports stories. And the publisher said, Kirk, you ought to write a book. And I said, okay, because I had all these blogs and need to do something with them. But secondly, as I was researching, I came across this statistic that said 80% of people have a desire to write a book, but less than 3% actually execute that. I've never been top 3% in anything. Here's my opportunity. Those are my motivations. So check that off the list. Anybody can write a book if I can write a book.
It seems so humble, but I love the idea. It's not just having the idea, but I'm also hearing you say there's some execution that takes place.
This process reminds me of post COVID. And during COVID with ESPN, and we were broadcasting a lot of our games remote. And so you were relying on technology. The broadcasters were in their basements and living rooms and bedrooms doing games, and I was doing the same thing. And I was working with a crew in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but they were at home. And our play-by-play guy went dead 6 minutes left to go before the end of the first half. So the color analyst took over, did play-by-play, carried us to about the 15-minute mark of the second half, and our play-by-play came back. You do the best you can.
Yes, that is definitely where we feel. Like for those who are watching, there was a little glitch in where we were recording, but I thank you, Kirk, for just understanding the journey of being able to kind of continue to move forward. Let me ask you, and this kind of goes to the next question when it comes to, you mentioned your time at ESPN. In working behind the scenes, what do most viewers don't realize about what it takes to make a production happen?
Well, at home, you hear the broadcaster, you hear the color analyst, sideline reporter, and then there's commercials. But for a football telecast, let's say, and a major college football telecast, at home you don't realize that there are as many as 200 to 250 people that are staffing that. Not only the broadcasters, but you have the camera operators. You have those that are in truck with graphics, with the production aspect of things, with the coordination, with any kind of writing that needs to take place. You have people that are on the sideline dragging cable for the camera operators, people that are setting things up. So some of these are volunteer roles that we'll get from a student body when we're at college, but the students are delighted to get on the field, and maybe this is their break to make that connection of their own if they want to go into this kind of field. But I think the enormity of the number of people that goes into producing a major event like that and the degree of equipment that goes into it, trucks, satellite dishes, cable, and more cable that go into that. It is a production, and it's done pretty quickly because that's maybe a Saturday game, and the setup doesn't begin until maybe a Friday morning to get all that set up for a telecast the next day.
Yeah, I've been a part of a couple major productions, and just understanding just a grip operator is just a job all by itself, just grabbing those cords and being able to help the camera operators navigate. And so those are just some unique nuances that you don't always see. But I want to, as our listeners kind of hearing this, it's not just these random jobs, but there are things that happen. And you said this at the beginning of our interview, and I really want to make sure we hone in on that. When you understand the big picture of your organization, or if you understand the big picture of, in your case, the game, everything matters. Those small things matters. And I love the way, the Bible says, and I kind of say this over and over again as we talk to some of our interviews, is that, hey, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. And that God has given us gifts and talents. And when we use those, it makes all the difference in the world to make the big picture, ultimately his kingdom, grow.
The perspective that we have of things. A few years back, there was a documentary series put together by Ken Burns on baseball. And one of the main characters was a Negro League player by the name of Buck O'Neil. Buck O'Neil became the goodwill ambassador for not just the Negro Leagues, but baseball in general. And Tony Dungy in his book writes about Buck O'Neill. And one of the things he highlights is his optimism. Buck O'Neill was at a baseball game with a friend, and there was a ball that was hit into the stands. And kind of like we had last year, it was destined for a kid, but the kid didn't get it. The adult seemed to swipe it away from the kid. And so Buck's colleague was commenting upon, oh, what a horrible thing. Kid deserved the ball, blah, blah, blah. And Buck said, maybe the kid wasn't there, or maybe the dad took that ball because his own son was at home sick and he wanted to get him a ball to take back to him to encourage him and uplift him a little bit. And so that perpetual optimism that came through from Buck O'Neill, and he's just one example of that, a different perspective that we often don't think of. Maybe we get cut off driving down the road. It could be somebody that's got an emergency situation that they need to get there. Somebody's sick. They need to attend to them. So before we get all rattled, 2001, 2002, 2003, think about it for a minute.
I love that perspective. Just understanding there's a different ways to view things. You mentioned this, and I really want to be intentional about this, where faith has been a part of your story, your connection to God and how it's impacting your life. How has that faith helped you make peace with seasons where responsibility was not necessarily your full control? You didn't have that full control. How did your faith help you navigate those seasons?
Well, I start just kind of from the fundamental of my faith to begin with. I'm not in charge. I'm God's vehicle for service here on earth. And God, what would you have me do in this situation? So those of us from that kind of faith perspective, we start initially as the number two, or maybe even number three, because God's often saying, I want you to go take care of this person, serve that individual.
Yes.
Example the other day, I was at the hardware store and there was a young lady who, for whatever reason, was trying to get her license plate onto her car at the Ace parking lot. So I don't know that story. But anyway, she was frustrated, didn't have the right bolts to go in there. So at that time, I felt the touch of an angel, said, go help that young lady. And so between myself and the Ace hardware guy, we got that license plate fixed. The tendency would have been for me to say, this is a prospective client. I'm going to give her my name, my card, and maybe she'll use me. And the tap on the shoulder said, no, you've done what I have asked you to do, son. She said, thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. Go back home. And that's how I use my angels in this world. So that was my opportunity to serve that role. So I begin from that perspective, and it becomes one of service. And as the number two, what can I do to help the person who is in charge, who is really probably not in charge? They're reporting to somebody else who's reporting to somebody else. But this is my jurisdiction for right now to enhance the way they do their work, to make them look good. And if I'm fortunate, I'm going to get some credit. But oftentimes you don't. But I know God is watching. So, Lord, I hope you're pleased with what I did in this instance.
Man, I love that. Just kind of recognizing God is ultimately watching. And I'm reading the story of Joseph with my son. And just that reminder, no matter where he was, the Bible specifically said, and the Lord was with him and prospered him. And I love that perspective. One other angle I want to lean in on is, you're very, candid with your age. You say, hey, listen, I'm in my late 60s, but for the person who feels like I may have lost the moment, or I may have missed that time in my life, what can you say to encourage them or let them know? How do you navigate those moments when you have, or those feelings when you feel like I may have missed the moment or missed a certain time?
First of all, to say I'm fortunate to have made it 69 years. Many people don't have that opportunity, so I'm grateful. And when I hear people say, I can't believe I'm getting so old, old age is tough and I have aches and pains, and I do too, but I've acquired wisdom along the way, and I wouldn't trade going back to be a teenager again. Those were tough days. I didn't know anything. So I mentioned the example of a few people like Paul McCartney, like John Glenn. Warren Buffett still gives financial advice. Lord, he's 95 now. So age is a state of mind, and I still teach group exercise classes. I've got a bike ride coming, cycling event coming up this weekend for 100 miles that I'm going to ride on Saturday. If I achieve that, it'll be my 29th time achieving that. And my goal,
Wait a
I want
second.
to try to do
Don't
that
go
in
past
50,
that. Hold on a second. You said 100 miles for this is the 29th time you've done 100 miles?
29th time. I've done 28 so
Oh my,
far.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness. That's
So
that is major. At 69, there's no excuse. So here I am in my 40s. Okay, I got to get myself together. But I love that. You
there
said
you
so you're
go.
about to do 100 one.
I'm planning on doing 100 again. The weather looks good in southern Georgia, and that's where the ride's going to take place. So we'll go for that. And my wife, when I get home, will say, "I think you're an idiot," and I'll say, Where do you want to go to supper? Because I'm hungry, darling." And we'll do that after the ride is over with. So just something to do and bucket list and oh, there's just so many things still to be achieved that are out there. I want to do a second book to complement the first one. It's like Ernie Banks used to say, let's play a double header. Let's play two. So we'll go for the second one.
Man, Kirk, I love that. I want to I know you have a lot going on. You're probably planning for this upcoming ride. I have one more question I want to ask you. For the person that's listening now, that's sitting in or serving in the second seat, what would you want to leave with them? You have an opportunity to identify. Most of our listeners are in their 40s, late 30s. What could you leave with them to be a blessing for them as the Seed Sower Coach?
Well, I know you've got a book out there about Scottie Pippen and playing his secondary role to Michael Jordan. And we were talking before we went live about Jordan didn't get his 6 rings without Scottie Pippen. But before we started talking, I kind of made a list of people that were maybe secondary. Um, Roy Disney, brother of Walt Disney, they collaborated together. He was second in command. Milton Eisenhower was an advisor to his brother Dwight. Richard Carpenter played piano for Karen Carpenter. They were the Carpenters. There was Simon and Garfunkel. Garfunkel probably secondary to Simon, but he sang Bridge Over Troubled Waters beautifully because he needed to fulfill that role. The triumvirate of Holland Dozier Holland, one of the great writers and putting together performing artists that got Motown going. Captain and Tennille. Uh, Captain played the piano for Tony Tennille. Um, Remember the Titans, Coach Boone and Coach Yost, who lost the job, but he became a valued assistant. The Lion King, Mufasa, his son Simba, eventually becomes the king. Those are your motivations for the power that comes in the secondary role and being ready if that opportunity presents itself for you to go into the primary role. But contentedness with being second in command, to be the vice president of the United States, to be the chief financial officer of a major corporation, to be the associate pastor of a huge church, those are achievements in and of themselves, and a person should be proud of ascending to those roles.
Man, Kirk, this has been special. I love that. You'll probably hear that again. I think it's so important. And going back to what you said earlier, just this concept of potential, that if you're listening to this as a listener, somebody who identifies as serving second, God has given you unique gifts and skills. Part of that is being able to serve when nobody else is watching, when the spotlight is on somebody else. And so today, Kirk, I just want to say thank you for your affirmation. Thank you for your journey. Thank you for your 69 years of wisdom in pouring into the team here at Serving Second. Family, this is the Serving Second podcast. Today, we had an opportunity to sit down with the Seed Sower Coach. And if you would like to connect with him, you Google that. Is it Seed Sower Coach.com?
The seedsowercoach.com.
The seedsowercoach.com, who is coached and now is serving as a coach to help people see gifts, the skills, and the potential God is coaching them. Thank you so much for joining us and look forward to catching you on the next episode. God bless.
Don't need the front row just to let your